Did you know there was a time in America when the color of your skin determined where you sat on a bus, which water fountain you could drink from, and what school you went to? It was called segregation. Segregation kept Black people and white people apart. Many people thought segregation was unfair, and they fought to change segregation laws. One of those courageous people was Rosa Parks. This is her story.
Rosa was born at a time in America when African Americans did not have the same basic rights as other citizens. To understand why, you have to travel back hundreds of years to when slavery existed in America.
The first Africans were taken from their homes in Africa, placed in chains, and brought as enslaved people. Enslaved people are owned by and work for other people. Men, women, and children were sold at auctions. Many enslaved people were forced to work on plantations or large farms. They never got paid for their work. The life of an enslaved person was harsh. They never had enough food to eat or clothes to wear, and they had no freedoms or rights at all. Many people wanted to end slavery. They were called abolitionists. Some abolitionists helped enslaved people escape to freedom from the southern states to the northern states. Slavery was not legal in the northern states. But slavery was important to the southern economy. The southern states did not want slavery to end, so they decided to start their own country, the Confederate States of America. But President Lincoln did not want the country to be split apart. The result was the Civil War. A civil war is a war between people of the same country. During the Civil War, President Lincoln signed a document that made all enslaved people free. It was called the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation means to set free. The war raged on for years. When it ended, the North had won. The southern states became part of the United States again. With the signing of the 13th Amendment, slavery had ended in America. African Americans were free from slavery, but not free from discrimination. Discrimination is the unfair treatment of a person or group on the basis of prejudice. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards an entire group of people. Rosa was born Rosa Louise Macaulay in 1913. She was the granddaughter of an enslaved person. Slavery was illegal. But America was still a place where African American people did not have basic rights and freedoms. In the southern states, new laws were passed to keep blacks and whites apart. It was known as segregation. The laws were called Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was a popular fictional character that was very insulting to black people. Jim Crow laws were made to keep black people and white people apart on trains, in restrooms, in schools, and restaurants too. Many people fought to end segregation laws, but in 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that separating or keeping blacks and whites apart was legal. It was known as the Separate but Equal Doctrine. Even worse than the Jim Crow laws was the violence. African Americans were always in danger, especially from groups like the Ku Klux Klan. They wore white sheets so no one would know who they were. They would terrorize and threaten African American families. Rosa remembered when she was young, sitting with her grandfather. At night, he would hold his gun by his side just in case he needed to defend his family from the Klan. Rosa always had a sense of what was fair and what wasn't. One day, a white boy threatened to beat her up, but she defended herself and threatened to hit him.
At that time, Rosa could have gotten in trouble for standing up to a white person. Even at an early age, Rosa had the courage to stand up for herself.
Eventually, Rosa and her family moved to Montgomery, Alabama. There, she learned all about segregation. There, Black people had to ride in the back of the bus, and they could only drink from certain water fountains labeled colored.
However, during that same time, there were many people, both Black and white, who fought for civil rights. Civil rights are rights that go with being a citizen, like equal protection and respect under the law, and the right to vote.
It was difficult and dangerous for African American people to vote in the South. But even though it was difficult to do, Rosa Parks tried several times to register to vote. At first, the registrar made her take a test, but never told her the results. She took the test a second time. This time, they said she didn't pass. But Rosa didn't give up. She took the test a third time and finally did pass. Nothing would stop Rosa from her right as a citizen to vote. One day, on the way home from registering to vote, Rosa got on a bus. She went through the front door and paid her fare. But according to the law in Montgomery, Rosa, being a Black person, had to step off the bus and re-enter by the rear door. The back was so crowded, Rosa decided to walk through the bus to get to the back. The bus driver became angry and told her to get off and enter by the back door. Rosa refused, and the bus driver pulled on Rosa's coat sleeve, which caused her to drop her purse. Instead of bending down to pick it up, Rosa sat down in a seat reserved for white people only. The bus driver became even more angry and kicked Rosa off the bus.
All of that happened in 1943. By then, Rosa belonged to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. Rosa had learned about the NAACP in 1932 when she married her husband, Raymond Parks. He was the first civil rights activist she had ever met.
One of the goals of the NAACP was to end segregation. Things were beginning to change in the country. In 1947, Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman ended segregation in the United States Armed Forces. Until then, white soldiers and Black soldiers were kept apart. Then, in 1954, the Supreme Court said that the separate but equal doctrine was not legal in schools anymore.
Many people believed if segregation could be outlawed in schools, it could be outlawed in other areas, on trains, restaurants, and buses too. But little did Rosa know, she would play such an important role in making that happen.
On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was on her way home from her job at a department store. She took the same bus she always took, but she didn't realize that the driver was the same one that had kicked her off the bus years before. After paying her fare, Rosa took a seat in the middle section of the bus. That was okay as long as there weren't any white people to occupy the seats. She sat next to a Black man. 2 Black women were sitting across the aisle. At the next stop, some white people got on and filled up the remaining seats. But one man was left standing. The driver looked back and saw him. Nobody moved.
Let me have those seats. Y'all better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats.
The 2 women sitting across the aisle and the man sitting next to Rosa got up. But Rosa didn't. She was tired of giving in and being mistreated.
Are you gonna move?
No.
then I'll have to have you arrested.
You may do that. Eventually, two policemen came and asked Rosa why she wouldn't get up.
Why don't you do as you're told and get up?
Why do you all push us around?
I don't know, but the law is the law, and you're under arrest.
Rosa was arrested and taken to jail.
The NAACP had wanted to challenge the bus laws for many years. Now they had their opportunity. They called for all blacks to boycott or stop using the buses in Montgomery on the day of the trial to show support for Rosa. Inside the courthouse, Rosa had her trial. She was found guilty of not obeying the segregation laws. Outside, the boycott was successful. The buses were empty.
That night, black leaders along with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. They held a meeting. Everyone at the meeting voted to continue the boycott if the city council did not change the segregated bus laws. The city didn't change the laws, so the boycott continued for another 13 months. Instead of riding the buses, people walked, took cabs, or shared rides. A lot of people lost their jobs, including Rosa and her husband. Then, the Montgomery City Council enforced an old law that said boycotts were illegal. So Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were arrested. The arrest brought a lot of attention to the peaceful boycott. Soon, there were bus boycotts in cities throughout the South. Eventually, Rosa's case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court decided that the law under which Rosa had been arrested was unconstitutional or illegal. Segregated buses became a thing of the past. 9 years later, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It made segregation in all public places illegal everywhere in America. It was now illegal to discriminate or show prejudice against anyone because of race, color, religion, nationality, or gender. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards an entire group of people.
Rosa's refusal to give up her seat on the bus had started protests throughout the country. Her courageous act of defiance helped to change America. Today, she is remembered as the mother of the modern-day civil rights movement.